The morning sun streamed through the window of Sarah's quaint kitchen, casting warm beams of light across the tiled floor. She sat at her small wooden table, her fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, its rich aroma filling the air. Yet, even amidst this comforting setting, her mind was a tumultuous sea of emotions. It had been 6 months since her divorce from Mark, a separation that had left her feeling raw and vulnerable. She longed for a fresh start, a new chapter that would allow her to heal from the wounds of their tumultuous relationship. But today, the lingering shadows of her past clung to her like an unwelcome guest. As she absent-mindedly stirred her coffee, Sarah's gaze drifted outside her window. She watched as Emily, the new neighbor, stepped out into the sunlight, her laughter ringing out like a melody. Sarah's heart twisted painfully as she noticed a glint of a sparkling engagement ring on Emily's finger, catching the sun's rays and reflecting them like shards of glass. It was a cruel reminder of the love she once shared with Mark. The sight of happiness radiating from Emily felt like salt in her wounds, and a pang of jealousy struck her hard, sinking deep into her chest. "Why her?" Sarah murmured to herself, feeling the bitterness rise within her. She had seen Emily and Mark together. Their chemistry was undeniable. They seemed so perfect, so blissful. Sarah recalled the late-night conversation she once shared with Mark. The dreams they had built together, now shattered and replaced by someone new. The ache of betrayal was fresh, and each laugh from Emily felt like a dagger aimed straight at her heart. Later that day, Sarah found herself at the local grocery store, her mind still reeling from the morning's revelations. She pushed her cart down the brightly lit aisles, trying to focus on the mundane task of shopping, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Emily and Mark. Just as she turned the corner into the produce section, she nearly collided with Emily, who was reaching for a ripe avocado. "Oh, Sarah, Emily exclaimed, her smile wide and genuine. "What a coincidence." "Hi, Emily," Sarah replied, forcing a smile that felt heavy on her lips. She tried to ignore the knot forming in her stomach as she noticed the ring glittering on Emily's finger once again. They exchanged small talk, the kind that felt fleeting and insincere. Sarah listened as Emily gushed about her upcoming wedding, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "We're planning a small ceremony in the park. It'll be intimate and perfect," Emily said, her enthusiasm palpable. "Mark is just so wonderful. I can't believe how lucky I am." Every word felt like a punch to Sarah's gut. She nodded along, her mind racing with thoughts of what her life could have been like. The plans they had made, the dreams they had shared. As Emily continued to talk, Sarah felt an overwhelming surge of competition brewing within her, a voice whispering that she should fight for what was once hers. But how could she? The reality of her situation crashed down on her like a wave, pulling her deeper into despair. "I'm really happy for you, Emily," Sarah managed to say, her voice strained but polite. "Mark's a great guy." The words felt like poison on her tongue, but she forced them out, desperate to maintain a semblance of civility. "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you," Emily replied, unaware of the storm brewing inside Sarah's mind. "It's just been such a whirlwind. We met at that community event last summer, and it's been a dream ever since." Sarah nodded, her mind racing with memories of the community event. The laughter, the dancing, the moments she had shared with Mark, now overshadowed by the knowledge that he had moved on so quickly. As the conversation continued, she felt her forced smile beginning to falter. The world around her blurred, and all she could think about was the life she had lost. Finally, Emily waved goodbye, oblivious of the turmoil she had stirred within Sarah. "I hope to see you at the wedding." "Yeah, I'll be there," Sarah replied, though her heart was heavy with dread. As Emily walked away, Sarah felt the weight of her own emotions crashing down like an unforgiving tide. She stood frozen for a moment, staring into the distance, feeling completely lost. That night, Sarah sat in her dimly lit living room, the silence around her a stark contrast to the chaos in her mind. She picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen as she opened social media. Each scroll brought up another picture of Emily and Mark, their smiles radiant and their happiness starkly evident. It felt like a cruel joke, and yet she couldn't look away. With every image, her resentment deepened, gnawing at her insides like a relentless parasite. In a moment of reckless impulse, Sarah's fingers flew across the screen as she typed a message to Mark. How could you move on so easily? Her heart raced as she hit send, the notification pinging in the dead silence of her home, echoing the turmoil within her. She felt a mix of anger and desperation, a need for closure that she feared would never come. As she waited for a response, her emotions swirled in a vortex of jealousy, longing, and rage. The night stretched on, and the shadows in her home seemed to close in around her. Sarah felt cornered by her own thoughts, trapped in a cycle of obsession that was spiraling beyond her control. She had once envisioned a life filled with love and warmth, but now all she could see was the stark reality of her loneliness. The sound of her phone chiming broke through the silence. It was Mark's response, and she felt her breath hitch in her throat as she opened the message. But as she read his words, she realized that they only served to deepen her pain. I'm happy, Sarah. I hope you can find that too. The finality of his words struck her like a bolt of lightning. She felt a surge of anger, her vision blurring with unshed tears. How could he be so indifferent? How could he move on so easily while she was left to piece together the remnants of her shattered heart? It was then that she realized she was teetering on the edge of something dark and dangerous, a feeling that whispered to her that she could not let this go. In the quiet that followed, Sarah sat alone with her thoughts, her mind racing with possibilities. The seeds of obsession were taking root, and the calm before the storm was beginning to fracture, setting the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. As she stared into the darkness, a chilling resolve began to form. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Days melted into one another, and the idyllic suburban neighborhood once filled with laughter and friendly chatter became a theater for Sarah's growing obsession. The sunlight poured through the curtains of her living room, but it felt filtered, as if it could no longer penetrate the darkness that had begun to envelop her mind. Each day, Sarah found herself at the window, her gaze trained on Emily's house, watching closely as she prepared for her wedding, unaware of the turmoil brewing just across the street. Emily seemed to float through life with an effortless grace. She hosted small gatherings with her friends, her laughter ringing out like a bell in the stillness of the afternoon. Sarah's heart twisted at the sight. How could she be so happy? Sarah muttered to herself, her fingers curling into fists against the window frame. It wasn't just jealousy that motivated her. It was a bitter taste of betrayal that lingered since her divorce. Mark had moved on, and now, his new life was playing out so openly before her eyes. His happiness, her anguish. Just breathe, Sarah whispered, forcing herself to step away from the window. She needed to distract herself, to find a way to quell the storm inside her. But deep down, she knew that the mere sight of Emily was enough to send her spiraling once more. Each day had become a relentless cycle of watching, plotting, and resenting, all while maintaining the facade of a cordial neighbor. When Emily sent out invitations to a neighborhood barbecue, Sarah's heart raced with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. She debated whether attending would be a moment of confrontation or a chance to mask her true feelings. After tossing and turning through the night, she decided she had to go. It's just a barbecue, she reassured herself, even as her stomach twisted in knots. Just a chance to be a good neighbor. The day of the barbecue arrived, and the air was thick with the aroma of grilled meat and summer vegetables. Sarah stood at her front door, peering out at the scene unfolding across the street. Emily was the center of attention, her smile radiant as she chatted animatedly with a group of neighbors. Mark hovered nearby, his presence both comforting and infuriating to Sarah. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped outside, forcing herself to walk over. She plastered on a smile, even though it felt like a mask. "Hi, Emily," she called out, forcing the cheerfulness into her voice. "Oh, Sarah, I'm so glad you could make it." Emily beamed, her eyes sparkling with genuine warmth. As they exchanged pleasantries, Sarah's heart raced. She could hear the laughter and chatter around her, but all she could focus on was Emily's engagement ring glistening in the sunlight, a stark reminder of everything she had lost. "It must be so exciting, planning your wedding," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "It really is," Emily replied, her enthusiasm palpable. "Mark has been such a huge help. I can't wait for everyone to see everything we planned. It feels surreal." "Surreal," Sarah echoed, forcing a smile that felt like it could shatter at any moment. "I'm sure it'll be beautiful." As they spoke, Sarah's eyes flickered to Mark. He was laughing with another neighbor, his carefree demeanor a knife twisting deeper into her heart. She felt the urge to lash out, to demand how he could stand there so easily, so relaxed, while she was falling apart. But instead, she swallowed her rage and masked it with polite conversation. Moments later, Sarah excused herself to grab a drink, her heart pounding in her chest. She stepped into the kitchen, hoping for a moment of solitude. The kitchen was crowded, but still felt like a refuge compared to the lively backyard. She leaned against the counter, trying to calm her racing heart. "Are you enjoying the barbecue?" Emily's voice broke through her thoughts as she entered the kitchen. "Yeah, it's nice," Sarah replied, her tone clipped. Emily, oblivious to the tension, began chatting about the wedding details, her excitement spilling over as she detailed the color scheme and the guest list. "I really want it to be intimate," she said, her eyes shining. "Just our closest friends and family." "Intimate," Sarah repeated, the words sparking a fire within her. That's great." The words felt heavy on her tongue, laden with bitterness. As Emily continued to talk, Sarah's hands trembled slightly, her mind racing with darker thoughts. Why was she here, pretending to be supportive? Why was she smiling when she wanted to scream? The knife set out on the counter caught her eye, glinting under the harsh kitchen lights. It was a simple kitchen knife, but in that moment, it felt like a symbol of her repressed rage, a way to cut through the facade she had been forced to wear. "Sarah," Emily's voice pulled her back to reality. Concern etched on her face. "Are you okay? You seem a little out of it." "I'm fine," Sarah snapped, the edge in her voice surprising both of them. She quickly softened her tone, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Just a bit overwhelmed, I suppose." "Planning a wedding can be stressful," Emily offered, tilting her head slightly. "But it's all worth it in the end, right?" "Right," Sarah replied, but the word hung in the air like a lie. The tension between them felt palpable, thickening the air as Sarah struggled to keep her composure. She could feel the urge to confess her true feelings, to unearth the buried resentment and jealousy, but she swallowed it down. "Hey, let's take a picture," Emily suggested, her cheerfulness unwavering. "We should document this day." Before Sarah could respond, Emily had already whipped out her phone and was pulling her toward the backyard. "Come on, everyone is waiting." As they stepped outside, Sarah felt a wave of dread wash over her. The laughter, the joy, it all felt like a taunt, a reminder of everything that had slipped through her fingers. She forced a smile as they posed for photos, the camera clicking, capturing moments that felt so far removed from her reality. After a few minutes, Sarah excused herself, retreating into the sanctuary of her own home. She paced the living room, her heart still racing. "What am I doing?" she whispered to herself, the weight of her obsession settling heavily on her shoulders. Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one darker than the last. The more she tried to rationalize her feelings, the deeper she sank into her obsession. Each interaction with Emily felt like a masquerade, a performance that pushed her further into the depths of her anger and despair. That night, as she lay in bed, Sarah couldn't shake the image of Emily and Mark laughing together, their happiness like a knife twisting deeper into her soul. The whispers of jealousy spiraled into a tempest, and as she closed her eyes, she knew this was just the beginning of her descent into darkness. The line between sanity and obsession blurred, and with each passing moment, Sarah found herself teetering on the edge of a precipice, unable to turn back. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across Sarah's dining room table as she sat across from Mark, her ex-husband. The flickering candlelight did little to warm the tension that hung in the air. Sarah had invited him under the pretense of wanting to catch up, but the real motive simmered just beneath the surface. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, a mixture of longing and resentment swirling inside her. "Mark," she began, her voice trembling slightly. I can't understand how you could move on so quickly. It's like you've forgotten everything we had." Mark leaned back in his chair, his expression a mask of indifference. "Sarah, we talked about this. It's been months. I've moved on, and so should you." His tone was flat, as if he had rehearsed these words 1,000 times. "Moved on," Sarah echoed, her heart racing. "You're engaged to Emily. I see you both together, laughing, planning a future. It feels like a betrayal, like you've replaced me." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she fought to keep them at bay. "Emily is not a replacement," he replied, his voice firm. "She's someone I want to build a life with. You need to accept that." "Accept it?" Sarah barely contained her anger. "You expect me to just sit back and watch you live happily ever after with her? You know how much that hurts me." The words spilled out, raw and unfiltered. "Sarah," Mark said, his voice softening slightly, "we weren't happy together. You know that. You need to focus on your own life now." "Don't you dare tell me what to do with my life." Sarah shot back, her hands clenching into fists on the table. "You may have moved on, but I'm still here, trying to pick up the pieces." She paused, her breath hitching. "I thought we had something special, something worth fighting for." Mark sighed, shaking his head. "We didn't have that, and you know it. It was toxic for both of us. You need to let go." He stood up, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape against the floor, and the sound echoed in the silence that followed. "Where are you going?" Sarah demanded, panic rising in her chest. "We're not done here." "I can't do this anymore," he replied, his voice steady but distant. "I have to go see Emily." He walked toward the door, leaving Sarah alone at the table, her heart pounding in her ears. As the door clicked shut behind him, Sarah felt a whirlwind of emotions crashing over her, anger, betrayal, and a deep, gnawing sense of loss. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through social media. Photos of Emily and Mark flooded her feed, each one a dagger to her heart. They smiled together, their faces radiant with love, and the sight twisted the knife deeper. In a moment of blind rage, she tapped out a message to Mark, her heart racing as she typed. "How could you do this to me? You were supposed to be my forever. I can't believe you moved on so easily." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, the ping of the notification echoing in the silence of her home. Days blurred together in a haze of obsession. Each morning, Sarah would sit by her window, watching Emily go about her life. She noted the way the sunlight danced off Emily's engagement ring, how she laughed effortlessly with friends, and how she seemed blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in Sarah's heart. The jealousy grew like a vine, wrapping itself around her thoughts, squeezing tighter with each passing day. "Hey, Sarah, I'm so glad you could make it." Emily greeted her with a bright smile at the neighborhood barbecue, oblivious to the turmoil swirling within. Sarah plastered on a smile, but her heart raced as she watched Emily and Mark together, their chemistry palpable. "Glad to be here," Sarah replied, her voice strained. She forced herself to make small talk, but the words felt foreign on her tongue. "I heard you're planning a wedding. That's exciting." "Oh, it is," Emily gushed, her eyes sparkling. "Mark and I are so in love. It just feels right, you know." She leaned in closer, her excitement infectious, and for a moment, Sarah felt a pang of longing for the life she once had. "Yeah, right," Sarah murmured, her smile faltering. "Must be nice to find that." In a moment of weakness, Sarah found herself cornering Emily in the kitchen later that evening. The air thickened with tension, and she forced herself to engage in friendly banter. "So, how's the wedding planning going?" she asked, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "It's been a whirlwind," Emily replied, her enthusiasm unwavering. "I can't wait to marry Mark. He's just perfect for me." There was a light in her eyes that made Sarah's stomach churn. "Perfect," Sarah echoed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "What makes him so perfect? You do realize he has a past, right?" Emily frowned, momentarily taken aback. "What do you mean?" "Just he's not the person you think he is," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "He has a history of hurting the people he loves." Emily's expression hardened. "You don't know him like I do, Sarah. You need to stop this." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Sarah alone in the kitchen with her thoughts spiraling out of control. That night, Sarah lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling. The shadows danced across the walls, mocking her. She needed to do something, to take back control of her life. A plan began to form in her mind, one that would sabotage Emily's perfect life and expose the truth behind her engagement. In the following days, Sarah set her plan into motion. She began whispering rumors about Emily to the neighbors, planting seeds of doubt. "Did you hear about Emily's family? They have a history of, well, let's just say it's not good," she told one neighbor, her voice dripping with feigned concern. The ripple effect was immediate. Conversations turned hushed as people exchanged wary glances. Emily, once the darling of the neighborhood, began to feel the isolation creep in. Invitations dwindled, and her laughter faded into the background, replaced by whispers and sideways glances. As Sarah watched from her window, a dark satisfaction filled her. She relished in the power that came from her actions, feeling invincible as Emily struggled to navigate the fallout. But with each passing day, Sarah's sense of victory was tainted by a nagging feeling deep inside. It was a dangerous game she was playing, one that could spiral out of control. One afternoon, as Sarah strolled through the local park, she spotted Emily sitting alone on a bench, her shoulders slumped and her eyes red-rimmed from crying. The sight struck Sarah with an unexpected pang of guilt. Was this really what she wanted? To see someone so utterly broken? Just as she was about to turn away, Emily looked up, her expression shifting from sorrow to determination. "Sarah, we need to talk," she called out, her voice steady. Heart racing, Sarah approached cautiously, every instinct telling her to run. "What do you want?" she asked, feigning nonchalance. "Why have you been acting so strange?" Emily demanded, her eyes boring into Sarah's. "I thought we could be friends, but it feels like you're trying to sabotage me." "Why?" Sarah's heart raced, panic washing over her. "I'm just trying to be a good neighbor," she lied, forcing a smile. "You know how small towns can be. People talk." Emily's gaze softened, but there was an edge of steel in her voice. "This isn't just gossip, Sarah. You're hurting me. I don't want to believe you're capable of this." For a fleeting moment, Sarah felt the weight of Emily's words, the truth cutting through her defenses. But as she looked into Emily's eyes, the jealousy surged back, drowning out any remnant of guilt. She couldn't let Emily win. Not now. "Believe what you want," Sarah replied, her voice icy. "I have my own life to worry about." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Emily staring after her, confusion and hurt etched on her face. As Sarah walked home, a mixture of triumph and dread filled her. She had managed to maintain her facade, but she knew the tension between them was far from over. The stakes were rising, and she could feel the darkness of her obsession closing in. The path she was on was leading her further away from sanity, and yet a twisted sense of power kept her moving forward. With each passing day, Sarah's grip on reality slipped further, and the line between friend and foe blurred. As Emily's isolation deepened, Sarah felt herself spiraling into a dangerous game of cat and mouse. The thrill of the chase fueled her, but the question loomed. How far was she willing to go to reclaim her past? The days leading up to Emily's wedding were a blur of anxiety and obsession for Sarah. She spent most of her time meticulously tracking Emily's movements, her heart heavy with a mix of jealousy and rage. The once serene suburban landscape had morphed into a battleground where every glance from Emily felt like a personal affront. With each day, Sarah's mind became a tangled web of dark fantasies, and as she stood in her kitchen, staring blankly out the window, she could see Emily through the trees, preparing for a big day with a cavalcade of friends and family. Sarah's fingers trembled as she clutched her coffee mug, the warmth barely registering against the cold chill that had seeped into her bones. The sun illuminated Emily's backyard, where colorful decorations adorned the space, a stark contrast to the dark thoughts swirling in Sarah's mind. She imagined the laughter, the music, the love that would fill that yard, a celebration of everything she felt she had lost. Why does she get to be happy? Sarah muttered under her breath, an edge of bitterness slicing through her words. Just then, her phone buzzed on the kitchen table, jarring her from her thoughts. It was a text from Mark, innocently checking in on her. A wave of anger washed over her as she read his message, the words, "How are you doing?" feeling like a taunt. "What a joke," she scoffed, sending back a curt reply before tossing her phone aside. She felt like a puppet, and Mark was the one pulling the strings, guiding her emotions, and she loathed him for it. But her hatred for him paled in comparison to the fury she felt toward Emily. As the wedding day approached, the line between Sarah's reality and her obsession blurred to the point of distortion. She had been stalking Emily, not just from her window, but also by following her to various locations around town. Each outing became a twisted adventure, filled with a mix of thrill and dread. The thrill of knowing Emily's routine gave Sarah a sense of power, but the dread of being caught gnawed at her insides. One afternoon, she found herself sitting outside a local cafe, watching as Emily met with her friends. They were laughing, sharing stories, and toasting to the future. It was a scene that pierced Sarah's heart, the laughter ringing in her ears like a mocking echo. She could feel her blood boiling as she watched Emily's gleaming engagement ring catch the sunlight, a constant reminder of what had slipped through her fingers. "Look at her," Sarah said quietly to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. "She thinks she's won." But deep down, she knew that this was far from over. No, she would make sure that Emily felt the same pain that had become her constant companion. With each passing day, Sarah's plan to sabotage Emily's wedding took shape. She found herself scrawling notes filled with accusations and slander, ready to disseminate them among their mutual friends. "She's not who you think she is," one note read, dripping with venom. "She's a homewrecker, and she will break your hearts too." The thrill of these actions filled her with a sense of control she hadn't felt in years. "Maybe I'll just drop these in the mailboxes," she mused, a wicked smile creeping across her lips. She envisioned the chaos that would ensue if her words reached the right ears, the doubt they would sow among Emily's friends and family. But as the wedding day loomed closer, Sarah felt an unsettling sense of urgency. She needed to act. The idea of Emily walking down the aisle filled her with a primal rage, and she couldn't sit idly by any longer. It was as if a switch had flipped inside her, igniting a desperate need for resolution. In a moment of twisted clarity, Sarah decided that she would write a note, pouring out her feelings of betrayal and loss. With a pen in hand, she began to draft a message that would encapsulate her pain. "You took everything from me, and now you're taking him," she wrote, her handwriting shaky yet determined. "You are a thief in the night, stealing what was never yours to take. I will not let you have him. I will not let you have this life." The excitement of her plan coursed through her veins, a heady mix of adrenaline and desperation. This note would be her proclamation, the final act of defiance against the woman who had usurped her life. She felt as if she was finally taking control, reclaiming the narrative that had spiraled out of her grasp. On the eve of the wedding, darkness enveloped the neighborhood. Sarah's heart raced as she prepared to execute her plan. She slipped into black clothing, blending into the shadows like a predator stalking its prey. with the note tightly clutched in her hand. She made her way to Emily's house, each step fueled by a tumult of emotions. As she approached the house, the laughter from the wedding rehearsal echoed outside. The sounds of joy and celebration pierced through her like shards of glass, intensifying her resolve. She paused, listening to the joyous voices of friends and family celebrating the love she so desperately wanted to reclaim. The sight of Emily, radiant and happy, only served to stoke the fire within Sarah. "Just a little closer," she whispered to herself, her heart pounding in her chest. She slipped through the slightly ajar gate, feeling a rush of adrenaline as she crept toward the back door. She had to act quickly. The laughter would not last forever. With a surge of determination, she pushed the door open, thankful for the lack of noise as it creaked on its hinges. Inside, the house was dimly lit, filled with the remnants of wedding preparations. Flowers adorned tables, and the sweet scent of cake wafted through the air, a stark contrast to the bitterness in Sarah's heart. She quickly moved through the house, her eyes scanning the surroundings until she found the perfect spot, a small table near the kitchen. There, she placed a note, making sure it was visible enough for Emily to find. It was a message she hoped would haunt her for days to come, a reminder of the chaos that had been unleashed. As she turned to leave, she heard Emily's laughter once more, this time accompanied by the deep, comforting voice of Mark. The sound sent chills down Sarah's spine, and she froze in place, torn between her desire to escape and her urge to confront them. But as she stood there in the shadows, heart racing, she realized how vulnerable she had become. The thrill of her plan had morphed into something darker, a feeling she could barely comprehend. She was teetering on the edge of something terrible, and for the first time, doubt crept into her mind. "Am I really going to do this?" she thought, her breath catching in her throat. The laughter outside continued, oblivious to the storm brewing within her. But instead of retreating, Sarah felt an unsettling sense of clarity. She had come too far, and there was no turning back now. As she quietly slipped out of the house, closing the door behind her, she took one last look at the scene unfolding outside. The laughter, the joy, it all felt like a taunt, a cruel reminder of the life she once had. And in that moment, Sarah knew she was willing to do whatever it took to reclaim it, even if it meant crossing a line she never thought she would. The darkness enveloped her as she walked away, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. The line between sanity and obsession had blurred, and she was now fully committed to her twisted journey. The wedding was just hours away, and Sarah was ready to make her mark, one way or another. The wedding day arrived under a bright, clear sky, the sun shining down on the picturesque suburban neighborhood that had become the backdrop for such turmoil. White tents lined the manicured lawn of the community center, adorned with flowers and ribbons that swayed gently in the warm breeze. Laughter and music drifted through the air as guests mingled, sipping champagne and sharing in the excitement of the day. Sarah stood at a distance, her heart heavy with a mix of resentment and sorrow. From her concealed vantage point behind a cluster of trees, Sarah's gaze fixated on the wedding venue. She watched as Mark adjusted his tie, his demeanor radiating happiness. The sight of him, so poised and confident, ignited a fire deep within her. Sarah's thoughts spiraled, replaying the memories of their life together, moments that felt like a lifetime ago. She remembered the way he used to smile at her, the warmth in his eyes that now seemed reserved for Emily. A pang of jealousy coursed through her, sharp and unrelenting. As the ceremony began, Sarah felt the weight of her emotions pressing down on her, a suffocating blanket of anger and despair. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, the physical pain grounding her momentarily. Each "I do" echoed in her mind like a taunt. How could he move on so easily, she thought bitterly. The happiness surrounding her felt like a cruel joke, one that she was no longer willing to tolerate. Suddenly, a reckless thought crossed her mind. She would confront Emily one last time. The mere idea sent adrenaline coursing through her veins, awakening a sense of purpose. Without a second thought, She marched toward the venue, her heart pounding not only from fear, but also from a growing determination. She pushed past guests who gawked at her sudden intrusion, their surprised faces blurring into the background as she focused on her target. The moment she stepped into the beautifully decorated hall, a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned towards her, a mix of shock and confusion etched on their faces. Emily stood at the altar, her radiant smile faltering as she registered Sarah's presence. The contrasting emotions on the bride's face stirred something primal within Sarah, an urge to unleash the chaos that had been festering inside her for far too long. "Sarah!" Mark shouted, his voice cutting through the stunned silence as he rushed forward. Concern etched across his features. "What are you doing here?" He reached for her arm, trying to guide her away from the altar, but she shrugged him off, her eyes blazing with fury. "I'm here for her," Sarah shouted, her voice echoing through the hall. Her heart raced as she caught sight of Emily's bewildered expression. She had to speak to her, to make her understand the depth of the betrayal. "You took everything from me." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Sarah could see the fear in their eyes. She felt a rush of power, knowing that she had captured their attention. Time seemed to slow as she moved closer to Emily, her chest heaving with a mixture of rage and desperation. Emily's smile had vanished completely, replaced by a look of trepidation. "Sarah, please," she said softly, her voice trembling. "This isn't the time or place for this." But Sarah was beyond reasoning. Fueled by a cocktail of jealousy and heartbreak, she pulled a knife from her bag, brandishing it before the guests. The glint of the blade caught the light, and the air thickened with tension. "I just want to talk to you, Emily. Just you and me," she cried, her voice breaking. Screams erupted, and guests scrambled for safety, creating a chaotic scene. Mark rushed to shield Emily, instinctively placing himself between her and Sarah. "Put the knife down, Sarah," he pleaded, his tone a mix of authority and fear. "You don't want to do this." The world around her faded as Sarah's focus narrowed. This was her moment, a twisted culmination of all her pent-up emotions. "You think you can just take him from me?" she shouted, her voice raw with pain. "You think you can just erase our history?" Emily's expression shifted from fear to something more profound, understanding. "I never wanted to hurt you, Sarah," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "I didn't know about your past with Mark until it was too late." "Too late," Sarah echoed incredulously, stepping closer, the knife still raised. "You're marrying him. You have everything I lost." The tears she had held back for so long brimmed in her eyes, blurring her vision. "Sarah," Emily said, her tone softening, "I know you loved him, but he's not the person you think he is." Mark's voice broke through the tension as he stepped forward, his eyes locked on Sarah. "This isn't the way, Sarah. You're better than this." In that moment, Sarah felt a flicker of doubt. Was she truly better than this? The knife felt heavy in her hand, the weight of her actions pressing down on her conscience. But the anger surged back, drowning out the flicker of reason. "You don't understand. You both took everything from me." As the crowd continued to panic, Sarah's voice rose above the chaos, a desperate plea for acknowledgement. "I just wanted you to know how it feels to be betrayed." Mark's expression shifted from concern to anger. "You're being irrational. This isn't how you solve things," he shouted, but Sarah barely heard him. The adrenaline was clouding her judgment, the thrill of the confrontation consuming her. "Let's talk. Just the two of us," Sarah insisted, her voice trembling with emotion. She glanced toward Emily, whose eyes were wide with fear yet filled with a strange compassion. "I need you to understand." The tension in the room was palpable, a tightrope stretched to its breaking point. In that moment, amid the chaos and fear, something shifted within Sarah. For the first time, she realized that this was not just about revenge. It was about her own pain, her own unhealed wounds. She was standing on the precipice of a decision that could change everything. The sound of sirens in the distance grew louder, a reminder that her time was running out. The police were coming, and the reality of her situation began to sink in. Would she really go through with this? Would she risk everything for a moment of fleeting power? As she stood there, knife in hand, the reality of what she was about to do hit her with the force of a tidal wave. The life she had envisioned for herself, the fresh start, the healing, was slipping away, replaced by an irrevocable darkness. "Sarah," Emily said softly, breaking through the fog of her thoughts. "Please don't do this. You're not a bad person. You're hurt, and that's okay." The sincerity in Emily's voice cut through the noise, and for the first time, Sarah hesitated. The knife trembled in her grip as confusion washed over her. Maybe this wasn't how it was meant to end. Maybe she could still find a way out without destroying herself. But before she could fully process her thoughts, the sound of approaching footsteps filled the air. The police were here, and in that moment, Sarah knew she had to make a choice. Would she succumb to the darkness, or would she fight for the light that still flickered within her? As the tension reached its peak, Sarah's heart raced, torn between the chaos she had unleashed and the faint glimmer of hope that remained. It was a moment of reckoning, one that would define her existence forever. As the tension in the air thickened like a storm cloud ready to burst, Sarah stood at the entrance of the lavish wedding venue, the flickering lights casting chaotic shadows across her face. Her heart raced, an intoxicating mix of rage and despair coursing through her veins. She clutched the knife tightly, its cold steel a reminder of the path she had chosen, a path of vengeance that had twisted her mind and clouded her judgment. Emily, dressed in a stunning white gown that shimmered under the twinkling fairy lights, turned to Sarah with an expression of confusion and pity. "I know you loved him, but I never wanted to hurt you." Her voice was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos around them. Guests gasped, whispering among themselves, their eyes wide with disbelief. Sarah's grip on the knife faltered as Emily's words sank in. Could it be true? Did Emily genuinely not realize the depth of her betrayal? "Stop!" Sarah shouted, the knife trembling in her hand. "You think this is easy for me? You think I can just stand here and watch you take everything from me?" Her voice cracked, the weight of her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Emily stepped closer, her demeanor unwavering. "I didn't take anything from you, Sarah. Mark and we fell in love. That's not something I could control." There was a softness in Emily's eyes, a glimmer of understanding that made Sarah's heart ache. Memories of her own love story with Mark flashed through her mind, moments filled with laughter, joy, and an overwhelming sense of belonging. But those memories were tainted now, marred by the betrayal and obsession that had consumed her. The chaotic murmurs of the guests faded into the background as Sarah's mind raced. She glanced at Mark, who stood a few paces behind Emily, his expression unreadable. In that moment, something shifted within Sarah. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing the truth she had been too blinded by rage to see. Suddenly, Mark stepped forward, his voice steady and confident. "Sarah, you need to listen to me." He looked directly into her eyes, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of something that felt almost like remorse. "I've been in contact with you all along, not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because I wanted you to realize how toxic this was." Her heart sank as his words hit her like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean?" she managed to stammer, the knife feeling heavier in her hand. Mark took a deep breath, glancing at Emily before continuing. "I never meant for things to unfold this way. I thought I could help you see that holding on to the past was only causing you pain. I wanted you to move on, to find happiness, but instead, you let your obsession consume you." The realization crashed over Sarah like a tidal wave, drowning her in a mix of anger and despair. "You manipulated us both," she shouted, her voice rising in pitch. "You played with our feelings like we were pawns in your game." Mark shook his head, his expression earnest. "No, Sarah, I only wanted to show you that all of this, it doesn't have to be your reality. You were spiraling, and I thought if I could get you to confront your feelings, you might break free from this obsession. I didn't expect it to go this far." Tears streamed down Sarah's face, the weight of her actions crashing down upon her with an unbearable heaviness. The knife slipped from her fingers, clattering to the ground as the gravity of the moment settled over her. "I was so lost," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought I could control it, that I could make you see how wrong this was. But all I did was destroy everything." Emily took a cautious step forward, her expression softening. "You don't have to be alone in this, Sarah. We can find a way to move past this. You just need to let go." But as the police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, Sarah felt a cold dread wash over her. She wasn't in control anymore. The consequences of her obsession were spiraling beyond her grasp. The flashing lights illuminated the venue, casting stark shadows across the faces of the guests, who had frozen in place, their eyes wide with shock and fear. "Sarah!" A voice called from behind her, and she turned to see an officer rushing towards her. "Drop the weapon. Now!" The finality of the moment hit her hard. She looked back at Emily and Mark, the couple who had unknowingly become the central figures of her unraveling life. In their eyes, she saw a mixture of pity and concern, but more importantly, she saw the realization that her actions had consequences, devastating ones that would haunt her forever. As the officer reached her, Sarah felt a profound sense of loss wash over her. "I didn't mean for it to come to this," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "I just wanted the pain to stop." With swift movements, the officer secured her hands behind her back, and as she was led away from the scene, she caught one last glimpse of Emily and Mark. They stood together, united in their love, while she was left in the shadows of her own making. The knife, the obsession, the betrayal. It all felt like a distant nightmare, one from which she could never truly awaken. As Sarah was ushered out of the venue, a profound silence enveloped her. The laughter and music of the wedding faded into the background, replaced by the piercing sound of her own heartbeat. She realized that her quest for revenge had only led to her own destruction. In that moment of clarity, she understood the true cost of her obsession. She had pushed away the very thing she had once cherished, and in doing so, lost herself in the process. All that remained was a hollow shell of the woman she used to be, consumed by a darkness that had obliterated her sense of self. The police car's door slammed shut, sealing her fate. As the vehicle pulled away, Sarah gazed out the window, watching the lights of the wedding venue fade into the distance. The tears continued to flow, but this time they were tears of regret. Regret for the love she had lost, for the friend she had betrayed, and for the woman she had become. The realization that she would be remembered not as the woman who loved fiercely, but as the woman who let her obsession drive her to madness settled heavily on her heart. In that moment, Sarah understood that she had not only lost Mark, but also her own soul in the pursuit of something that was never meant to be. And as the darkness enveloped her, she knew she had to face the consequences of her actions, a haunting reminder of how obsession can consume even the brightest of lives, leaving only shadows behind.